What is up, YouTube? I'm Devon DaVinci, leader of the Renaissance crew, and you're watching DaVinci Reacts. This may appear on my gaming channel. I think that's where I'm probably going to put it because I kind of categorize Pokemon as more of a video game series, more so than like an anime series or something. But the reason I wanted to check this video out is because if you grew up in the 90s, like me, then you were there to witness the original release of the first Pokemon games and the craze that came along with it. Like this like phenomena had everybody swept up. The kids were swept up in the games, the anime, the Pokemon cards. The adults are swept up in constantly mispronouncing either every Pokemon's name or just calling everyone Pikachu or Pokemon. Everyone said Pokemon. Don't know why the hell. It's not spelled that way. I don't know why the hell you would call him Pokemon, but many people did it. Even down to like religious figures trying to say Pokemon were like a sign of the devil, and like there was witchcraft and devil worshiping in Pokemon. It was fucking weird. I mean, at that time, everything that like parents or adults weren't really into, they tried to blame on the devil or some crap like that. But it is what it is. This is going to be a video that explains the rise and fall of Pokemania in the 90s. Now, I just can't quite explain just how crazy it was back then. I think the closest we've ever gotten to since then was when Pokemon Go came out. And like the first couple weeks of Pokemon Go, like everybody was playing it and like it was all over the place. You even had like Hillary Clinton famously fucking saying her line or whatever. But there was, even with that, I don't think it was quite at the same level as the Pokemon craze of the 90s. Like that was a fun period to be in. Like when I was a kid, you could literally use Pokemon cards as currency on the playground to like get whatever the hell you wanted. It was cool. There was an entire counterfeit system where people would take like little thin pieces of cardboard and like glue pictures of Pokemon cards on them and like trick people into thinking that they were Pokemon cards. I may or may not have fallen for one of those things once. It was a good counterfeit. Don't get it twisted. Kids can get very what's the word I'm looking for? They can engineer some pretty well looking stuff when they put their minds to it. But let's go ahead and jump into this, see what it has to offer. I'm curious to see what exactly killed it, because for me, my love, well, not my love, but my craze for Pokemon kind of died down around the time the third generation came out. Like the first two generations to me, I remember were like crazy. And then by the time the third generation came out, the Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, the craze that kind of like died down a lot. And it never really like left that. But let's see when they describe when it was and like what exactly may have caused the downfall of it. Downfall is a strong word. Pokemon is still loved, but the craze isn't there anymore. Oh, by the way, this video, the original video will be in the description box down below. Be sure to check it out. Support the original content creator. Go to the video, hit that like button, subscribe, and share if you do enjoy this. If you're a reactor that want to do a reaction yourself, you can use that link to get to the original video so you don't have to worry about like me commenting over it or anything like that. And the video was, yeah, the original creator of the video's icon will pop up on my video around here at the end of the video. You can click on it and it'll take you to their channel. You can see what other content they may have.
Welcome back to Who's That Pokemon? I am your host Brandon, and today we're going to be examining why exactly Pokemon Mania ended when it did. Pokemon has been a pop culture staple since it burst onto the scene in 1996, and those who predicted it was a passing fad were proven to be extremely wrong. However,
I always
Pokemon
thought it was
at one point in
97.
time was inescapable and impenetrable.
Maybe 96 in
It was
Japan.
what
I'm not.
Fortnite or the Marvel Cinematic Universe is today times 10. I want to examine what
Yeah.
exactly caused Pokemon to drop off the perch as the media monster it was during the late 90s. But to do that, we need to start at the beginning and see how Pokemon rose to the top.
I will say the 90s had a lot of crazes, like where people were so into stuff that it almost felt like a religion. Because not just Pokemon, but when you look at like the Beanie Babies craze, the Tickle Me Elmo craze, the Furby craze, like people were going nuts over those things. And I'm not quite sure like what was really the driving force behind it. Um, like I know in the 80s you had like Nintendo, you had like Michael Jackson, you had like certain things that were also kind of crazy, but that in the 90s, like in a very small period of time, between like 95 or so and like 98, there was just like a ton of different crazes that like were all over the fucking place and people were going nuts over them. Like I don't know exactly what was causing it, but I mean, if you can think of anything else that was like getting a lot of attention around that time, be sure to drop it. Yeah. The Rise. It sounds almost like the Mortal Kombat.
Now know, Pokemon was
Don't that sound kind of like Mortal Kombat?
As most people now know,
You remind me a
Pokemon
lot
was
of the
birthed
Mortal
from the brain
Kombat theme
of
song.
Satoshi Tajiri, who was inspired by his insect collecting hobby as a child. On February 27, 1996, Game Freak would release Pokemon Red and Green on the Nintendo Game Boy. The games were a hit immediately, and a special updated version, Pokemon Blue, was released on October 15. It was only available by mail order at the time and updated several things from the original game, including artwork, to provide the definitive Pokemon experience. Due to the explosion in popularity,
Upgraded
it was
artwork.
decided that the games would be localized for Western audiences.
I've already said I was a Pokemon Yellow fan, so when I look at stuff like that, I have a bit of an elitist mindset. Like, that's your upgraded artwork? Sure. Because the Pokemon Yellow fans, we got the game that had the artwork that was inspired by the anime, so the sprites and stuff on our games were like 100 times better.
Nintendo feared the series would tank in America, believing there was a strong chance it wouldn't appeal to American kids. They allegedly spent $50 million promoting the games to combat this concern. Pokemon Red and Blue was slated for release on October 28, 1998.
I remember this
almost
commercial.
3 years after they had first landed in Japan. The fear that the games wouldn't find a market outside of Japan was soon put to rest, as Red and Blue sold almost 10 million copies in the United States alone. Japan had also begun airing the Pokemon anime series on April 1st of 1997, and as part of the marketing push into the West, it was decided this would be brought over too.
Prepare to join a boy on a quest. Prepare for Pokemon.
A special sneak peek was aired
I
on
don't remember
September
that
7,
commercial.
1998 of the Battle Aboard the SS Anne episode as an introduction to the series, and the very next day the series aired its actual premiere. There was a genuine argument to be made at the time that the anime was more popular than the games. The main cast of Ash Ketchum, Pikachu, Missy, and Brock became...
I would say it wasn't, well, I'm only speaking from my own perspective. For me, it wasn't really like the anime being better than the games. Funny enough, I kind of considered them to be separate things almost. Like, the games were one thing, the anime was another. I never really jumped into the games with the same, like, expecting anything from the anime. Like, I always thought of the anime as kind of like just something that pulled references from the games, kind of, and like thought of the anime as its own thing. I didn't even think of the anime as an anime. I thought of it as a cartoon. Like, that's the funny thing. Like, when people talk about like their first anime that they've ever been into or something, a lot of times they'll overlook Pokemon because they don't consider it to be like a traditional anime, even though it is.
household names and were quickly beloved by children everywhere. Pokemon had just begun executing one of the greatest marketing strategies in history.
Pokémon, short for Pocket Monsters, was born 4 years ago as a Japanese video game. The star is Pikachu, who does lighthearted battle with 150 other characters.
Lighthearted battle?
The #1 TV show, the number
That's
one
one way I
video
would not
game,
describe a Pokemon
and most
battle.
of all in the popular trading cards.
They hit audiences with the anime,
Trading
Red and
cards.
Blue on Game Boy a month later, and the Pokemon trading card game closely followed behind in December of that same year. Much like the anime,
I had the Zapdos. I had the Mewtwo. I believe I had the Alakazam. I had the Raichu. And I think I had the Blastoise.
there are cases to be made that the trading card game was as popular or even more popular than the video games. at
Again, the
one point in
trading
time.
card
Kids
game
traded
was
these around
separated
the
from the
schoolyard
other
to
two as
no
well.
end, forcing
Like,
many schools to ban them altogether due to arguments over trading and stealing. Of course, banning them did nothing at all
Yeah,
to
it's
slow
crazy
down
to think
popularity.
about it. I didn't consider any of them to be like connected.
That's crazy.
With video games, a TV show, and a trading card game, Pokemon had 3 significant cornerstones of the 90s market covered within just 4 months of debuting in America. With Pokemon now rapidly rising, the merchandising followed. Everything from plushies and figures to board games and clothing, people were desperate to cash in on this phenomenon. Heck, in Australia they were slapping pictures of Pokemon on quite literally anything. I distinctly remember packets of Kraft cheese that had Pokemon branding and a single trading card inside. I got a Dark Charmeleon from one of these. The Pokemon franchise was riding a
I
high
do
that
remember,
really hadn't been seen since Star
like
Wars.
cereals and like snacks and stuff like that with Pokemon branding on them. I think there was one time they made like a Pokemon branded Pop-Tart I might have gotten because of that. I can't really think of anything else I grabbed that because they had the Pokemon brand on it, but that was definitely one of them. Maybe I had a Pokemon themed party at one point. I don't know.
Loaded onto the scene, so naturally the series turned its eyes to the big screen. Pokemon the first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back, debuted in Japan before the craze
the
had even
first
touched America,
movie,
being released on July 18 of 1998.
the
After
hype
the
around
series
this
was a
movie.
confirmed hit, 4Kids began
Damn.
producing an English dubbed version, set for release on November 18, 1999.
I'm sorry I'm pausing a lot. I'm just trying to, one, add feedback, and two, get some context as like my upbringing when it comes to Pokemon. The first movie, when it came out, I remember that the movie theaters, they gave out this like old, like hieroglyphic looking Mewtwo or Mew card, and it had like what looked like Egyptian hieroglyphics on it. I don't know what the hell happened to it. I had one. I don't know what happened to it. I probably lost it during the moving process at some point. And I remember around the same time, Burger King had like a promotion where they were having kids meals that had this like, you could like pay a little bit extra and they give you like this like model Pokeball, and it would open up and there was like a gold plated card inside. I remember getting one of those also. Don't have it anymore. I wish I did.
About a year after the boom had begun in the West. The hype for this film was through the roof. Kids were stoked to see their favourite show on the big screen, and even more excited to see the legendary Mewtwo taking on Mew.
Yeah.
A Pokemon that many people actually questioned was real or not at the time.
This was another movie that I got on cassette. I didn't get a lot of movies on cassette, so if I got some on cassette, it was a big deal. I've only ever asked for 4 movies on cassette.
Movie
Lion
theaters were given
King,
exclusive trading
Jurassic
cards to give
Park,
away at screenings,
Lost
giving
World,
kids even
Jurassic
more
Park,
reason to nag their parents into
Pokemon
taking them,
first movie.
and an excuse for them to try and potentially dupe them into taking them a second time. The movie, much like everything else in the franchise at the time, was an instant success. It debuted at number 1 at the box office and made $10.1 million on its opening day, which was a Wednesday, I might add. Across the weekend, it made $31 million, breaking the record for the highest opening for an animated feature, which would only last just 2 weeks thanks to Toy Story 2. However, there was a little hiccup and some signs that things might be slowing down for the series. The second weekend saw a dramatic 60% drop, making $12.5 million. While the film was still a financial smash hit, it didn't have great legs at the box office.
All right, because most
Worldwide, the
people
film made
already, like, that wanted to see it,
163.3
already
million,
watched it.
And domestically, it made $85.7 million. A great result, but significantly less than Toy Story's $245 million for comparison. It's also interesting to note that, when adjusted for inflation, Mewtwo Strikes Back made roughly $135 million in the US. Detective Pikachu has only just surpassed it at the domestic box office, which goes to show just how much of a juggernaut Pokemon was in the 90s. With new games, more movies, and more of the anime on the horizon, could Pokemon really be on a downswing?
I remember the Pikachu's Vacation short also. First time we saw Meryl or Pokeblu or
Pokemon the first movie was a
we
definitive
thought it was.
commercial success, and amongst kids, it was a critical success
Snubble.
too. At the time, I didn't know a single kid who didn't absolutely love the movie. When the film was released on VHS, that was a cultural event, and I distinctly remember how insanely hyped we all were when one of the TV channels here played the movie. Think about that for a second. We were so into this franchise that we were excited to watch the movie with commercial breaks, despite already owning it on VHS. However, non-fans of the series did not enjoy it.
Also, I don't know if people, well, I'm sure people like remember this, but I remember the movie was like tied into the anime. There was episodes of the anime where Giovanni had showcased this Pokemon that had like the mechanic, the mech like helmet and like armor and stuff on, and Gary went to fight him and got completely his ass handed to him. And like I was at the time, you think like, oh my god, what is that Pokemon? I think at that point, like we knew it was Mewtwo, but they were kind of being vague about it. But like people are like, it's Mewtwo. But yeah, it was awesome. I remember when that first happened. So there was a little bit of crossover between the anime and the movie. I think the beginning of the movie actually like readdresses those
already
things.
owning it on VHS. However, non-fans of the series did not enjoy it. From the beginning, Pokemon had always had its fair share of detractors, particularly overzealous parents and talking heads on TV who would scream about it being violent, satanic, or just too big of a distraction for kids.
Yeah.
So Pokemon is a game that teaches children how to enter into the world of witchcraft.
These criticisms were different though. The previous adult hate was coming from people who had probably never actually interacted with the series. While
Of course, they're the same people that were like up in arms about heavy metal, the same people that were up in arms about violent video games like Mortal Kombat and Night Trap, the same people that were anything that got popular among kids. These were the same people that were like trying to find like excuses for the downfall of the generation or the degeneracy of kids nowadays. Oh, it must be because of this, it must be because of that. Like it was just completely stupid.
these new criticisms were coming from movie reviewers and the parents who took their kids. The movie fared atrociously with critics. Negative reviews were probably to be expected, but the level of intensity to these reviews wasn't. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film was rated rotten, and just 15% of the reviews were positive.
I think
Average
at that
rating
time,
critics worked out to be
a lot of people also
3.6
had
out of 10. The critics' consensus on the site is a pretty good summary
a
of the
negative
reviews.
idea of
Audiences
anime.
like children will find very little to entertain them. Here are some of the reviews from the top critics at the time. This film is humorless, boring, impenetrable, and with animation of such staggeringly low quality that it constitutes an insult to cinemagoers of all ages. Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian. The story is a humorless retread of a Bond-style world domination yarn with a Frankenstein theme. Wally Hammond, Time Out. Pokemon isn't even good animation, unless the standard of measure is the crude LCD graphics of a Game Boy. Robin Rousey, Los Angeles Times.
Yeah,
Personally,
I think
the
adults at
critical
that
hate of
time were
this movie
still
was way
very.
overblown, and I believe that a lot
I think that at this time, a lot of adults, especially like people that were on TV and everything, were still looking down on video games and anime as like they had like negative ideas of like nerd culture and were very judgmental towards it still. So like Pokemon, I believe Dragon Ball Z probably got the same criticisms at the time. It's like they just had this like elite mindset of this type of stuff. So yeah, like no matter how good the movie would have been, they would have probably talked crap about it because it was anime at the end of the day.
times. Personally, I think the critical hate of this movie was way overblown, and I believe that a lot of this backlash was because of a preconceived dislike for Pokemon before seeing this movie, as well as the Pikachu's vacation short preceding it, which, it shouldn't be a knock on the movie. People didn't discredit Coco because Olaf's Frozen Adventure played before it. I could probably make a whole video on that topic, so I'll leave it for another day. You're probably asking yourself, why do
There
the
was a lot of
opinions
hate for
parents and
Pokemon.
crusty old critics matter?
Anything that gets
Well,
really
reviews
popular,
can
people are
actually
gonna
have quite
some
a
people are
large
gonna hate
impact
it.
on a movie's commercial success. And while it didn't necessarily affect this movie, it certainly would have impacted the next two, and potentially may have affected the legs of this movie.
I could certainly recommend this movie for you kids. This is a cartoon with a very gentle and positive message, which is pretty clearly spelled out. My final assessment, Pokemon may be hokey for adults, but will be okie dokie with the kids.
Well, you know, if a movie is not good for adults, in a way it isn't good for kids either, because this movie, it seems to me, is basically just part of the whole marketing thing to encourage kids to be inquisitive about these Pokemon things. And I know they're obsessed by them. I know there are 4 million Game Boys out there, and they all have the trading cards, and they watch the TV show and all of that. But what is this really about? I mean,
Additionally, the parents who are bored to tears by Mewtwo Strikes Back are probably going to be hesitant to take their kids to the next one. Sure, a lot of parents would probably suck it up and sit through The Power of One just because their kids want to watch it, but you'd also have a lot of parents who'll end up not taking them. Speaking from experience, my mum often brings up how boring this movie was to her, and she even remarks that she might have fallen asleep during it. Needless to say, she passed off the Pokemon duties to my nan for the second and third installments.
I mean, I'm not gonna like knock them. I can see how someone that's not really into anime and stuff like that would see this as a boring movie. It was very much that whole power of friendship type of thing, and if you're like if you didn't grow up with Pokemon, you would definitely like look at it and be like, okay, this is kind of dumb. But he's got to be open-minded and understanding. Like, there's a reason why we loved it. And it got so much craze. Like, nothing terrible gets this type of craze without reason.
Needless to say, she passed off the Pokemon duties to my nan for the second and third installments. In my opinion, the stark drop-offs you see in money made at the box office for The Power of One and Spell of the Unknown are partially due to this. Sure, it was probably expected the sequels wouldn't do as spectacularly, but the drop was far more than you'd expect. Pokemon the Movie 2000 The Power of One hit theaters in America on July 21, 2000.
I remember
just 8
seeing
months
that,
after Mewtwo Strikes Back
but this was the
debuted.
last
You also
movie
need
that I
to
was really
consider that Mewtwo
enthusiastic
Strikes
about.
Back aired in hundreds of cinemas until mid-February of 2000, meaning for many people, it had only been 5 months in between films. As we saw with Solo, A Star Wars Story, even when you have a massively popular franchise, releasing a follow-up so soon can be a problem. The Power of One made a still quite impressive $19 million in its opening weekend at the box office, and $27 million in its first week. The second week saw a 65% drop though, a trend which only continued on from there. Domestically, it made $43.7 million, over $40 million less than Mewtwo Strikes Back. Funnily enough, The Power of One actually made more money than Mewtwo Strikes Back in non-US markets. The first film grabbed $77 million, while the sequel grabbed over $90. This could definitely be chalked down to the Pokemon craze reaching other countries a little slower. It reviewed poorly, albeit slightly better than the first movie, grabbing a 19% and 3.7 average rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The critical consensus was, despite being somewhat more exciting than the previous film, this kiddie flick still lacks any real adventure or excitement. What it does contain is choppy animation and poor voice acting. It doesn't match up to virtually anything out there. Again, I would argue this is unnecessarily harsh, but that's beside the point. Another reason I'd like to throw in for the potential drop in popularity is the removal of Brock from the anime. There were genuine fears that Brock's character design could potentially be perceived as racist, something they would experience with Jinx. To get out in front of this problem, they had Brock leave the cast early in the Adventures on the Orange Island season, replacing him with the milquetoast and completely inoffensive Tracy Sketchit.
Guys may
Is-
need me a lot.
Is that the reason why Tracy became the third adventurer with him, and why Brock left? I didn't even think about this. Like, I never considered Brock to be a stereotypical look or anything. Like, did anybody this is the first time I'm actually hearing it. I didn't even think of Brock as like black, honestly. like I just thought he was like a tanned Asian dude. So I'm just like, this is shocking. I truly did not know that might have been the reason why Brock didn't show up in that second season. Yeah, like, I wasn't really a fan of Tracy. The only thing I liked that Tracy ever did was when he was the protagonist of the Pokemon Snap game. Like, that's kind of it.
Lot more than you guys do.
Well then, I guess this is goodbye.
Friends to the end, right, Ash?
Right.
Personally, I never minded Tracy too much, but there are a lot of fans who at the time hated Tracy, or at the very least were extremely mad that Brock was no longer part of the main cast. I'm only speaking anecdotally here, but I've noticed many fans discuss that Tracy's inclusion was a significant marker for when they lost interest in the show.
Yeah, I didn't
Episodes
hate
where
him. It
Brock
was
joins
just, he
Professor
was
Ivy
kind
and
of
Tracy
plain.
joins the main cast aired in January 2000, relatively close to Mewtwo Strikes Back ending its theatrical run, and well before the
Don't get me started on that damn GS ball. But I would have assumed that if Brock would have ever caused any type of controversy, it would probably be his constantly like hitting on girls. That would be the only, like, if someone asked me like, hey, Brock was involved in a controversy, that's what I would think of. Like, maybe it has something to do with the constantly hitting on girls or something. I don't know.
January 2000.
I would have never
relatively
thought
close to
like,
Mewtwo Strikes Back
oh,
ending
people
its
would be
theatrical
offended
run,
by
and
the
well
way he
before the
looks.
Power of One's July release. Brock returns in a tent situation, which aired on October 7, meaning it's entirely plausible that the people who lost interest due to Brock leaving may have skipped the movie. The anime seems to have stumbled a little bit in the West here, but what about the games? Well, speaking of October, that very month on the 15th, Pokemon Gold and Silver released in America. Introducing players to a whole new world with brand new Pokemon, the franchise seemed to be as strong as ever. To date, Gold and Silver have sold 23 million copies, proving the games weren't going away anytime soon. This was proven by the
Forget the
avalanche
fact
of
that these
spin-off
kids are
titles
10
that
years
began
old
releasing
going
around
out
this time.
exploring the world,
Unfortunately,
and
things on the anime side of the franchise
like
weren't
frozen
as rosy.
tundras and
While the
volcano
move to a new
areas and
region
stuff.
with the same beloved cast was mostly welcomed, opinions quickly soured.
And adults
An
are just
early
cool with
sticking
it.
point was the much discussed GS Ball. I'm going to do a standalone episode on the GS Ball, but for those who don't know, this was a scrapped plot that was supposed to introduce Celebi, but was shelved in favour of introducing it in a movie. The GS Ball was the driving point sending Ash to the Orange Archipelago and to Johto, so when Ash got to Pokeball Master Kurt and still didn't get any answers, it disgruntled a lot of fans. Going Apricorn, the episode featuring the end of the GS Ball saga, aired on March 10, 2001. Do you know what was just around the corner? Pokémon 3, the movie, Spell of the Unknown.
Complex, classic but bold. Advanced while still somehow primitive. In other words...
Yeah?
I don't have a clue.
Pikachu! You're kidding, right?
I have no idea who designed this thing, but it's protected by a very powerful lock. There must be a way to break that lock, but I don't know what it is.
Releasing on April 6, 2001, Spell of the Unknown marked the third Pokemon movie to hit theaters in under 18 months.
Yeah, I don't even
Die-hard
remember
Pokemon
seeing
fans
this
like
movie,
myself,
honestly.
This was heaven. But for more casual fans, as well as uninterested parents, this was way too much. It's also interesting to note that
I do feel like
Digimon
I
the
remember
movie
got
was
that
released on
Pokemon
October
card.
6 of 2000.
I did see
While it's
Digimon
not
the movie.
Pokemon, it's in a very similar vein. It's clear that we'd reached the saturation point when it came to theatrical movies. Pokemon Forever received a limited release on 249 screens, making $1.7
I'm gonna have to do a video
in the US, and Pokemon
reaction
Heroes
to
released
something
on just
Digimon
200
related,
screens to
because
make $746,000.
that was something else I was huge
There would
into,
be
but I fell
extremely
off.
limited releases from about the 14th movie onwards, but Pokemon wouldn't properly return
But I
to
know why I
theaters
fell
until
off of
I Choose You
Digimon.
in 2017 as a Fathom event,
Because the
showing
designs
on
became too
789 screens and making almost
humanoid and
$2.5 million.
robotic.
It shows you how far the series had fallen at the
That
box
they just
office.
became
that
mechs in
Fathom
the end.
event in 2017 garnered
Stupid. I
more
like the
interest than a
animal looks.
Pokemon film in 2002. Spell of the Unknown's opening weekend grabbed just $10 million, making less money than the first movie did on its first day. The movie then dropped 59%, which seems to be the trend with these films, and finished with a domestic gross of $17 million and making $68 million worldwide. Needless to say, these were the worst numbers in the franchise's short history.
All I can think of is the reason why the numbers kept dropping like 60% every week is because the fans of Pokemon probably were anticipating the release of the movie like from the very beginning, and they like probably went out of their way to go and watch it immediately. The people that were coming to watch it the second week or whatever, I'm willing to guarantee they were either people that weren't already into Pokemon like that, or they had like a really serious reason why they couldn't have watched it the first week. Because if you're a fan of Pokemon, you're going to get your ass to that theater on night one. Like there is no like waiting for it.
Even the foreign box office had dipped to just 51 million. It was clear that Pokemon movies had fallen out of favor. Maybe it's pure coincidence and I'm a conspiracy nutter, but Brock being absent before and after the Power of One releasing and the GS Ball being abandoned before Spell of the Unknown seriously seemed like they may have had an effect. As the Johto saga progressed, more and more people seemed to drop out of it. I'm speaking purely anecdotally, but I don't know many people who watched the latter half of Johto, including myself. A lot of this drop in popularity can purely be accounted for bandwagon fans going away. You know, the kids who always jumped on the hot new thing only to abandon it when something else came up?
I would also say that there's a good possibility that the reason why people kind of fell off of Pokemon is because right around this time when the third movie was coming out, this is when anime started to become much more mainstream. And I think that people probably started to move on more towards quote unquote mature anime. So like the Dragon Balls, the Narutos, the Bleaches, the One Pieces, the like those type of anime, I think people started to like gravitate more towards. I know that was probably the case for me because like Pokemon had always had kind of like a kiddie type of feel to it. And by this point, I think most people that grew up with the original Pokemon craze from 96, 97, they were probably hitting teenage years at this point, and now it was probably considered less cool to be a fan of Pokemon, at least the anime. The games were still like doing their thing, but the anime itself, like most people probably started to fall off. Because I remember when the anime first came out, I was in elementary school. I was all over that shit. I used to watch it every single morning before I went to school. And I remember by the time I hit like middle school, I wasn't paying attention to Pokemon like that. I was much more into Dragon Ball Z. So yeah.
That's them. However, another big reason why people were giving up on the anime was the insane amount of filler that had been creeping into and taking over the show. Pokemon had been no stranger to filler episodes in the past. The Orange Islands was an entire filler arc, but the show was becoming incredibly bogged down with it now. Kanto flew by in a flash, with it taking 80 episodes to reach the end of the Pokemon League. We then moved on to the Orange League, which was designed to kill time, but it didn't feel like filler. Johto, on the other hand, took 155 episodes to get to the end of the Pokemon League, almost double the amount of time. I put together a list of episodes a few years back of all the episodes that had major events in them, aka a list of episodes that took out all of the filler. Each season generally has the same amount of filler except for in Johto. To give you a good understanding of how much filler there was, Only 14 episodes of Johto League Champions have major events occurring in them. The rest of the episodes are filler and can be skipped with absolutely no consequences.
Wow.
There are 157 Johto episodes and only 47% of those episodes legitimately matter. 63% of the region can be skipped. Despite this, it might not really be the anime's fault that there was so much filler. The time between the release of Generation 2 and Generation 3 can be to blame. The 3-year gap between Generation 2 and 3 and not introducing a filler arc like Orange Islands meant they had to stall for longer.
That is interesting.
The time between Johto and Hoenn,
I didn't realize
the
the
to Hoenn in general, in my opinion, hurt the franchise's
span between games was that big.
Pokemon fans in America had received Red and Blue in 98, Yellow in 99, Gold and Silver in 2000, and Crystal in 01. A
very
new Pokemon game per year was
short,
expected at this
periods.
point. It was the norm, and those outside of Japan knew no different. Unfortunately, this wasn't realistic to maintain, so when Pokemon made the leap to the Game Boy...
All I can think of is the reason why it took so long is because they were just waiting for the Game Boy Advance to come out. Like, I think that's probably it. Because it doesn't make any sense why Ruby and Sapphire takes so much longer to, like, release when Gold and Silver came out, like, a year after the first generation did. And that game has 2 fucking regions in it. The only time that's ever happened. So, yeah. I mean, that just goes to the genius of the Nintendo president. I forgot his first name. It was Iwata. Yeah, he definitely like did his thing with the Gold and Silver generation, which is why it's considered one of the best generations, even though from a storyline / Pokemon design aspect, to me, it's one of the worst. But I love that generation as far as the games are concerned because it offered like so much.
Different. Unfortunately, this wasn't realistic to maintain. So when Pokemon made the leap to the Game Boy Advance, it felt like an eternity. Constant new content is the best way to keep a fad alive, but by the time Ruby and Sapphire hit shelves in early 2003, it was too late. It didn't help that Ruby and Sapphire received relatively mixed reviews amongst fans at the time either. A big sticking point was not being able to trade over Pokemon from Gen 1 and 2 games. While Game Freak had legitimate reasons for this, it was never going to go over well with fans. Add in the fact that the Hoenn region felt so disconnected to the rest of the series, and you have a recipe for a bit of fan backlash.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan
Johto
of
was a new region, it was still connected to Kanto,
the Hoenn region.
And the overall region was quite similar in
it
style.
just wasn't as interesting to me as the other two.
This was not the case with Hoenn. While I feel that Emerald did a lot to turn fan opinions around, I think a lot of damage was done to older,
to this day, Generation 3 kind of sticks out to me.
Anecdotal
as like
evidence,
different.
But almost every single one of my friends had stopped playing or watching Pokemon at this point. Heck, I was barely even interacting with the show and the games at this point. I think the final factor that helped see Pokemon drop down from record-breaking popularity to a more normal popularity was the rise of adjacent type shows. During the late 90s, Digimon seemed to be the only real competitor to Pokemon that followed a similar idea or style. This led to a lot of
there was a lot of anime that were trying to cash in on the whole Pokemon craze. There was Digimon, there was Monster Rancher, there was Shaman Kings. Yeah, there was a lot of like monster collecting type of shows and things like that were coming out around the time. Again, like I said, I was a big fan of Digimon, but like a little bit after the first movie came out, I kind of lost interest because, again, I love when these types of shows have like animal / like monster aesthetics. I was a big fan of Zoids at the time as well. That was very much like robotic animals fighting each other. But once they start getting humanoid and start to become mechs, I lose interest. I'm personally not really a fan of the mech thing. Like, I was never really big into Gundam. There was only one series of Gundam that I was a fan of, and that was the one where they had like the different nations that had like Gundams representing them. Like they had the Japanese Gundam, the Chinese Gundam, the American Gundam, the German Gundam, the French Gundam. I forgot what exactly that series was called, but I used to love that one.
Fair comments about Digimon being a clone.
But that was the only
Yu-Gi-Oh! And Beyblade
Gundam thing
began
I actually
airing around
liked.
the world in the early 2000s, and the concept of those shows.
And I hated the
inspired
original
by
series
Pokemon.
with
These
Hero
two
that
franchises followed
goddamn.
the format of a young kid who is
He was
gifted
worse
in
than
an
like
unusual
Squall
type
from
of
Final
sport.
Fantasy VIII.
In the exact same vein
Just
as
so
Pokemon. These series saw immense
dislikable.
success initially, and no doubt would have eaten into Pokemon's stranglehold. Then, when you have knockoffs of these series that were inspired by Pokemon,
Yu-Gi-Oh!
like
Another one.
Duel
Yu-Gi-Oh!
Masters
Too.
and Crush Gear Turbo, the entire market starts to become extremely saturated.
I guess Beyblade to a lesser extent. That was more just like
Now, I
spinning
know
tops.
some of you are probably screaming at your screen right now about how Pokemon is still one of the most popular franchises in the world. And you're not wrong. It's literally the highest grossing franchise of all time. I know that Pokemon is still ridiculously popular, but for years it was inescapable, whereas now it's drowned out by many other franchises.
Yeah. Like I said,
At
people
one
don't
point in time,
understand the
Pokemon
mania
was the
that
only
Pokemon
thing
once
that mattered
had.
to most kids. In the years following
Or
the
that
missteps
it
the
once
franchise
was.
took,
They
it still
just
managed to
don't
maintain
understand.
popularity, despite losing a lot of its mainstream relevance. I think a lot of this is thanks to Pokemon Emerald as well as Fire Red and Leaf Green. The Kanto remakes quelled those who were angry about the move to Hoenn and allowed them to reunite with their old favourites, and Emerald was mostly lauded by fans for its great improvements, particularly the Battle Frontier. At this point, Pokemon basically settled into a groove.
Like I said, the
that it's been
closest
in
we've
for
ever
about
been is
15
with
years
Pokemon
now,
Go.
and has seen the same steady
Pokemon Go
numbers
is the
across
closest we've ever
franchise.
gotten
However,
to
is Pokemon
the original
poised for a mainstream
Mania.
comeback? Pokemon Go jolted the series back into a lot of people's minds and got lots
Yeah.
of new people into the series. Unfortunately, Go being extremely half-baked upon its release may have stopped it from reaching its full potential in pulling even more people back into the franchise.
What killed Go for me was when it came out, there was a lot of third-party services and apps that would do things to help you like get different Pokemon. So like there'd be like map tools that would help you know like, oh, this Pokemon showed up in this spot, so you can go straight to that spot and try to catch it. Things like that. And then Pokemon or Nintendo, they went out of their way to like kill all those apps. And now it's like the only way to know what's out there is to actually like go outside and walk around and search and see what pops up. And it's like, I'm not about to go searching miles away from my house just for the possibility of seeing what could be out there. Like, no, let me get a map or something that can show me where it's at. In the real Pokemon games, the Pokemon aren't just, I mean, you're just not like walking around and just like looking to see what Pokemon, like there's Pokédexes and there's like things that like, what's the name of that device that like shows you what the Pokemon are in the area? The Pokénav, I think, something like that. I forgot the name of it, but there's like devices like that that show you what Pokemon are appearing in this area. How come they can't do that with Pokemon Go? How come that's considered cheating? Like being able to pinpoint where a specific Pokemon is and going to that location. That seems like it should be like just obvious to me. I don't know. Nintendo like shot themselves in the foot with like how much against they were of these services. Now I get the GPS manipulating tools that people were using to like essentially like make it seem like their phone was like traveling so they could like literally go to places without actually going anywhere. I can understand that, even though I still would probably do something like that. But I understand why they would consider that to be cheating. But yeah, it makes no sense why you didn't like the idea of people knowing where the Pokemon were.
The Detective Pikachu movie also saw a lot of buzz and has done fantastically at the box office, but it's not setting the world
Detective
on fire in
Pikachu
terms
was
of
good.
mainstream
I liked it.
popularity. The original Pokemon Mania was truly lightning in a bottle, and even the craziness surrounding Pokemon Go's release was only half of what it was like in the 90s.
That's what I'm
Overall,
saying.
The ridiculous popularity of Pokemon was never going to last. The perfect storm that catapulted them to success was just far too hard to sustain, and it was always going to experience some sort of drop-off. Despite this inevitability and unsustainability, I think it was extremely interesting to look back on the series' history and analyse just why it dropped off when it did, and hopefully it's been an enlightening and entertaining walk down memory lane.
Yeah. I love going down memory lane. So much so that I've even, well, I thought I was going to keep talking. I love going down memory lane so much so that I've even thought about making like a nostalgia related channel, which I might still end up doing. Who knows? And if I do, this will definitely be one of the videos that pops up over there. But again, like the Pokemon craze was absolutely crazy. If you are someone that was around in the 90s and can actually remember the Pokemon craze, and I'm talking about the original Pokemon craze. I'm not talking about like if you got into the series in the 3rd generation or the tail end of the 2nd generation. No, I want to know if you were there when that stuff dropped, before the first movie came out, and remember the hype that was around that. If you remember all the toys and stuff that came out with it, like the little plastic Game Boy thing that had like the Pokeball that you push the screen button and the Pokeball shot out. Like all the toys and stuff, the Nintendo games like Pokemon Stadium, Pokemon Snap, when those came out. If you remember stuff like that, Go in the comment section. Let me know what you all think. Now, if you're not from that generation, still get in the comment section and let me know like your experiences with Pokemon. But I want to know the people that like distinctly remember it. Like, what do you remember from that era? Maybe something that like is obscure that most people from that weren't around probably forgot about, or even people that were around that just haven't thought about it in a long time. If you remember something, be sure to let me know. If you played like games like Hey You Pikachu, or if you remember any type of like bootleg Pokemon games, because I know there was a lot of them out at that time. I remember playing PC games that had like fake Pokemon games on it. If you remember any of that stuff, go in the comment section. Let me know, because I would love to hear from you guys. Anyway, I want to thank, let me see, the person that made this, WTP Productions. So I will have a link for their video at the end of the video, somewhere around here. Their icon will pop up. You can click on their channel and stuff. Oh, it's Who's That Pokemon? WTP, duh. And if you like their content, be sure to go over there and support them. Yeah, this is all for the love of Pokemon. I'm a huge fan of the series. Now, I'm not really the most enthusiastic about where the series is right now. I am optimistic about Pokemon Legends ZA. I'm looking forward to it. I will definitely be getting that game when it comes out, and I'll be playing the hell out of it. But as far as like the mainline Pokemon games, like I play them, but I haven't really been enthusiastic about them since X and Y came out, honestly. But we'll see. Anyway, I'm Devon DaVinci. I'm going to give you the deuces. I look forward to seeing what you guys have to say about the franchise and everything. And until then, I'm signing out. Peace.